engine light on a 2.0 TDI Volkswagen Tiguan. And when we read the code, we've got this P2015 intake manifold flat position. When we clear the code, the fault clears, but it comes straight away back. So we go back in, the code is returned, just ignition on, no engine running, key is returning straight away. The vehicle won't also do basic settings for the intake manifold flap motor, so we're going to start doing some diagnostic tests and see what this issue is caused by. And as I said, we've clicked the basic setting, come down to the intake manifold V157 adaptation. Let me just start the car. So the idle RPM is increased. So we can see the glow plug light is flashing while it's doing the basic setting also. But when we look in the engine bay and we look at the values on the screen, we're not actually getting a change in voltage or the arm actually moving. So nothing is moving. We'll put the oscilloscope on this and just confirm and just see what's happening while we do this output test. So we've got a picoscope, oscilloscope just attached, and channel 1 the blue just got going into pin 5, which I believe is the power for the motor, and I'm referencing that to battery ground, ignition on. We have got 12 volts. We've now moved our pin into pin 4, and we're also getting 12 volts until we actuate this. So when we actuate this should switch to ground, as that is being switched. The ground side is being switched by the ECU, so we would expect that to be probably duty cycled down to ground, controlling that motor for the inlet manifold. Just run a second channel, and I've got it running into pin 1 and then reference to battery ground again. And that is our 5 volt reference for the flat position potentiometer. So that is that's the 5 volt reference for it. So that should say 5 volts all the time. And as we can see, the red line is on the 5 volt mark. We're on 2 different scales here. So the channel 1 is on a different scale, so you can see 12 volts, and that's what we've got as battery power to our motor, which will be switched to ground when it's operated. Checking pin 3 on this connector, we should see a good earth as the what you call sensor ground for the potentiometer for the positioner on the flat motor basically. So you've got 3 wires, 1, 2, 3. 1 is your 5 volt reference, 2 is the signal back to the ECU, and number 3 is the sensor ground. Number 4 is the earth for the motor, which is ECU triggered, and number 5 is the power for the motor. So we're in our pin 2 now. We are getting somewhere around the 0.6, 0.7 volts on our signal back to the ECU. So that is basically what the ECU is seeing, is this voltage here. So we've actually got 0.3 of a volt there. So usually on a potentiometer you would work between a range of somewhere like 0.5 up to 4.5 volts. Now this may be why the unit isn't activating, because it's actually jammed in past its end stop or something like that. We will see. We will try and activate this and see if we get a duty cycle come up on this. We're on the back side of the motor, so we will see this should drop down to earth, down to 0, and then flick back up really quickly as it duty cycles the control earth of the motor. And if that happens, obviously this isn't moving because this is the potentiometer, we can't see the rod moving, but we can try and maybe take the rod off and see if we can move it or something like that, see if the motor will actually move without the rod on, and just try some things like that first. So what we'll do is we'll start it up and we'll do the basic settings and see if we get a duty cycle output. So we're on the signal wire back to the ECU, and we are getting a voltage 339 milliamps. And we need a minimum of 500, so we need half a volt for us to have correct operation of this potentiometer. So if we then move to, if we look in at our arm that's in there, I'm just hooked on with this hook pick. I'm just pulling on the arm, and it will move the arm and move the potentiometer, and we will see the plausibility of the potentiometer now. So this is just in pin 2 of the wire and plug that I'm looking into. You could do this with a multimeter as well. So if I pull on this and move that rod, we can see it goes up to 4 volts. So maximum 4 volts, but it's going to a minimum 0.3. So we are going for our range fine when I pull the flap. So we should only ever go between a maximum and minimum, so 0.5 volts up to 4.5 volts maximum. So we're below that 0.5 of a volt, so that means that we're in the outside of the diagnostic tolerances that a 5 volt referenced sensor will allow. That 0.5 of a volt each side is merely for diagnostic purposes, for example like this, so we know it's gone past its lower end stop. So we're going to try and fit the Diesel Geek thing, and we'll move the rod up out of the way. We'll fit the Diesel Geek bracket, tighten it up, and then we'll let this rest back down, and it should bring it above the 0.5 of a volt range, and then we'll be able to clear that code again and do basic settings. And then we should then, once the basic settings will be allowed to be activated, because we won't be constantly logging this code, and we'll be able to clear it because we'll be above the 0.5 volt threshold. We should then see the duty cycle of this motor as it's being basic settinged. So we're just going to fit this bracket to the inlet manifold. I'm going to take one of the bolts out, which will go through this eyelet, and it will sit, I believe, like this, and it will stop the rod from going back. So if you think that I'm pulling the rod this way at the top, this is going to stop the thing going back, so it actually sits higher. So with the Diesel Geek bracket fitted, we can now try and clear the code, and hopefully our basic setting will go well. And that bracket just holds the rod away from the end stop and creates a external end stop for the motor. And now we are resting on about 0.5 volts, or 528 millivolts is what it's saying on the screen there. So that should now give us the threshold of where I was pulling it with the pick before. So we'll go back to VCDS, clear our codes, no codes come back, so now we can try and do our basic setting. So starting the engine straight after clearing the codes, and we've actually moved our reference back to the feedback to the ECU up to our maximum position of 4 volts. So we're now operational. So because we had that fault code stored constantly, the system was inactive, and it was actually not operating the inlet manifold flat motor. So we'll just try and do a basic setting. I'll reconnect my pin, and we can see there straight away, there's our duty cycle for the flat motor, so that's our control, and we'll just now do a basic setting. So everything is now functional again because we're now back in our parameters. And as we can see, voltages are now changing, and it's going to learn those voltages of its maximum and minimum positions. And we can watch the duty cycle change as the positioner changes also. So the motor is being duty cycled to change the positioner value. And that Diesel Geek bracket has fixed the issue, and we now no longer have the P2015 code stored. And that's basic settings complete with the V157 intake manifold runner motor. We'll just go back in to check our fault codes. No fault codes, everything is operating as correctly. Take the vehicle for a drive, make sure no codes come back. See if we can do an output test. We might have to have the ignition on only for this. Just going to do an output test. Intake manifold flap. As we watch the value on the oscilloscope, it's completely taken the manifold flap down to its minimum position, and then it's back up again. So it's just playing with the values, moving things around. The output test complete. We've still got functionality. So yeah, it's all looking good basically. So it looks like the Diesel Geek manifold bracket has been a good rectification of the P2015 fault code. This is well documented. Just thought I'd do my own video on it and just attach a P-code just for just showing a bit of what's actually going on and why you're doing it. So hopefully that helps.